2019, a man used a musical instrument box to escape from the most heavily guarded facility in Japan. This man was no ordinary individual. He was Carlos Ghosn, a Lebanese billionaire and a former CEO of Nissan, one of the largest car manufacturers in the world. When such a lofty person could stage something as audacious as escaping, and what compelled him to risk it all in a crate? The story of Carlos Ghosn is one of power, betrayal, and an exit that's never been seen before. It all began when Carlos, former Nissan's messiah, was picked up by the Japanese law enforcement for financial crime. The arrest, which occurred under the charge of conspiracy and political game, happened when Carlos was about to get off of his private jet in Tokyo. For example, he was charged with financial misconduct, such as underreporting profits and abusing company property, charges he vigorously denied. Carlos was subjected to tight conditions while on bail. His passports were seized, he was prohibited from contact with his wife, and he was isolated in his house, constantly recorded by the state. The confines were to break him, to isolate him, and make him fragile. It became clear to Carlos that his hopes for a fair trial were slim. With a prosecution rate of 99.4% in Japan, the odds were overwhelmingly against him. Carlos would be smuggled from Japan in a big crate and disguised as musical instruments. The destination, freedom in Lebanon. The key to this daring plan lay in a loophole at Osaka airport. The airport's X-ray scanners were designed for small luggage, meaning that large boxes, like those used for musical instruments, were not required to go through the same rigorous checks. This loophole became the crux of Carlos' escape. On December 29, 2019, two men posing as musicians, Mike Taylor, a former U.S. Special Forces operative, and George Zayek, a fellow ex-soldier, arrived in Japan with oversized instrument cases. They claimed they were in Tokyo for a concert and needed to leave for another show in Istanbul on the same day. Carlos, wearing winter clothes and a mask to conceal his identity, slipped out of his house, met with Mike and George at a hotel, and climbed into the box. The team then transported the box to the airport, convincing the staff to handle it with care due to the fragile instruments inside. As the box passed through airport security without inspection, Carlos remained motionless, listening to the casual chatter of the customs officers. The box was loaded onto a private jet and flown to Istanbul, where Carlos was quickly taken off and put on another plane, now flying to Beirut. It wasn't until he felt the wheels lift off the runway that Carlos allowed himself a sigh of relief. He had escaped, against all odds, from a country that seemed determined to bring him down. Upon his arrival in Lebanon, Carlos Ghosn reunited with his family. Despair met the news of his escape as it went around the world and infuriated the Japanese as well. They quickly issued an Interpol arrest warrant, but Lebanon refused to extradite him. Carlos made a press conference in Beirut, stating to the world that he did not run from the law, but from the lawlessness. Still, Carlos Ghosn is now being held in Lebanon, on the run from Japan, but as a free man in the country of his origin. Carlos Ghosn's rise to power began decades before his dramatic escape. Born in Brazil to Lebanese parents, Ghosn was raised in Beirut and later studied in France, where he earned degrees in engineering. His career began at Michelin, the French tire company, where he quickly made a name for himself as a brilliant problem solver. His success at Michelin led to an offer from Renault, the French automaker, which was struggling financially at the time. At Renault, Carlos Ghosn earned a reputation as a turnaround expert. He implemented sweeping changes, cutting costs and improving efficiency, which ultimately saved the company from bankruptcy. His good performance at Renault also attracted the attention of Nissan, which was in a critical financial position. In 1999, Renault took over majority ownership of Nissan and Ghosn became its chief executive officer CEO. Ghosn's leadership transformed Nissan. He closed unprofitable factories, slashed jobs, and streamlined operations. His tough measures were controversial, especially in Japan, where lifelong employment was a cultural norm. Despite the backlash, Ghosn's strategy worked. Within a few years, Nissan was profitable again, and Ghosn became a hero in Japan, celebrated as the man who saved the company. He was even featured in Japanese comic books and was dubbed Le Cost Killer for his aggressive cost-cutting measures. By 2005, Carlos Ghosn was leading both Renault and Nissan, making him one of the most powerful figures in the automotive industry. He was the first in the world to run two Fortune 500 companies at the same time. He led the Renault-Nissan alliance to one of the biggest automotive companies in the world. Ghosn was hailed as a visionary, a leader who could bridge cultures and make bold decisions that others feared to take. However, Ghosn's rise to power also made him enemies. His lavish lifestyle, which included private jets, luxurious homes, and extravagant parties, was at odds with the conservative corporate culture in Japan. He was portrayed as an alien, a parvenu wearing his money openly and gloating over it. This all led to resentment of Kondo on the part of Nissan's management and the Japanese government, who increasingly looked at him as a burden instead of a benefit. In 2018, Carlos Ghosn's world came crashing down. He was arrested on charges of financial mismanagement, such as understating his earnings or using company funds for private purposes. The arrest was a shocking turnaround story for a man who, at one point, was being called the corporate messiah. Ghosn denied all charges, insisting that he was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by Nissan executives and Japanese officials who wanted to prevent a full merger between Nissan and Renault, a merger that Ghosn had been pushing for, which would have given Renault more control over Nissan. The conditions of Ghosn's detention were harsh. He was subjected to solitary confinement, made to sit through extended, unlawyered interrogations and cut off from his family. The Japanese legal system, and everything about its notoriously high conviction rate, provided no hope for a fair trial. Ghosn understood that escape was his only option, if freedom is to be achieved. On the day of the escape, Carlos Ghosn left his residence disguised in winter clothing, his face obscured by a hat and mask. He made his way to a hotel in Tokyo, where he met with Taylor and Zayek. The team had brought 2 large musical instrument boxes, one of which was empty and intended for Ghosn. The box was lined with breathing holes, allowing Ghosn to remain inside for an extended period without suffocating. Once Ghosn was inside the box, Taylor and Zayek loaded it into a van and drove to Osaka airport. The airport was chosen because of its relatively lax security procedures for oversized luggage. The team had identified a loophole: large items like musical instrument cases were not required to go through the same X-ray scanners as smaller bags. This loophole was crucial to the success of the plan. The flight to Istanbul was tense. Ghosn knew that any unexpected delay or inspection could lead to the discovery of his escape. He kept inside the box throughout the flight, but only unboxed himself after the plane got safe in the air. Ghosn was transferred to another aircraft, this aircraft on its way to Beirut. The second leg of the journey was shorter, and Ghosn felt a sense of relief as the plane touched down in Lebanon. Today, Carlos Ghosn remains in Lebanon, unable to leave the country due to the Interpol red notice issued at Japan's request. He lives in a state of limbo, safe from extradition but unable to travel freely. His story has yielded debates on corporate governance, the equity of Japan's legal system, and attitude of foreigners toward Japanese corporate culture. Despite the controversy, Ghosn continues to speak out, giving interviews and working on projects from his home in Beirut. He has expressed no regrets about his escape, insisting that he had no other choice. "I didn't escape from justice," he famously said. "I escaped from injustice for Carlos Ghosn, the man who disappeared in a box. The battle for his image and his freedom is just beginning." That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more of these kinds of videos. Thanks for watching.